Chapter 6. The Power of Society's Social Interactions in Everyday Life. Is our use of social networking sites much of a personal choice as we may think? In 2005, just 10% of the U.S. adults were making use of social network sites such as Facebook. By 2014, almost 3 out of 4 adults were. But age is a powerful predictor of who uses social media. While less than half of the people age 65 or older were using social media sites, 89% of the people between the ages of 18 and 29 were doing so. Chapter Overview. This chapter takes a micro-level look at society, examining patterns of everyday social interaction. First, the chapter identifies important social structures, including status and role, which guide our behavior and link us to others. Then explains how we construct reality in social interaction. Finally, the chapter applies the lessons learned to 3 elements of everyday life: emotions, language, and humor. Harold and Sybil are on their way to another couple's home in an unfamiliar area near Fort Lauderdale, Florida. For the last 20 minutes, as Sybil sees it, they have been driving in circles, searching in vain for Coconut Palm Road. "Look, Harold," says Sybil. "There are some people up ahead. Let's ask for directions." Harold, gripping the wheel ever more tightly, begins muttering under his breath, "I know where I am. I don't want to waste time talking to strangers. Just let me get us there." "I'm sure you know where you are, Harold," Sybil responds, looking straight ahead, "but I don't think you know where you're going. Why have you never bought a GPS?" Harold and Sybil are lost in more ways than one. Not only can't they find where friends are, where their friends live, but they cannot also understand why they are growing angrier with each minute passing. What's going on? Like most men, Harold can't stand getting lost. The longer he drives around, the more incompetent he feels. Sybil can't understand why Harold doesn't pull over to ask someone the way to Coconut Palm Road. If she were driving, she thinks to herself, they would already be comfortably settled in with their friends. Why don't men like to ask other people for directions? Because men are so eager to claim competence and independence, they are uncomfortable asking for any type of help and are reluctant to accept it. In addition, to ask another person for assistance is the same as saying, "You know something I don't know." If it takes Harold a few more minutes to find Coconut Palm Road on his own and to keep his sense of being in control, he thinks that's the way to go. Women are more in tune with others and strive for connectedness. From Sybil's point of view, asking for help is right because sharing information builds social bonds and at the same time gets the job done. Asking for directions seems as natural to Sybil as searching on his own as is to Harold. Obviously, getting lost is sure to create conflict for Harold and Sybil as long as neither one understands the other's point of view or how to use a smartphone with Waze. So, such everyday social patterns are the focus of this chapter. The central concept is social interaction, the process by which people act and react in relation to others. We begin by presenting the rules and building blocks of everyday experience, then explore the almost magical way in which face-to-face interaction creates the reality in which we live. Social Structure, A Guide to Everyday Living, page 137. On October 21st, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. This morning we leave the ship and make our way along the docks toward the center of Ho Chi Minh City, known to an early generation as Saigon. The government security officials wave us through the heavy metal gates. Pressed against the fence are dozens of men who operate cyclos, bicycles with small carriages attached to the front, the Vietnamese version of taxicabs. We wave them off and spend the next 20 minutes shaking our heads at several drivers who pedal alongside, pleading for our business. The pressure is uncomfortable. We decide to cross the street but realize suddenly that there are no stop signs or signal lights, and the street is an unbroken stream of bicycles, cyclos, motorbikes, and small trucks. The locals don't bat an eye. They just walk at a steady pace across the street, parting waves of vehicles that immediately close in behind them. Walk right into traffic with our small children on our backs? Yep, we did it, and that's the way it works in Vietnam. Members of every society rely on social structure to make sense of everyday situations. As our family introduction to the busy streets of Vietnam suggests, the world can be confusing, even frightening, when society's rules are unclear. Let's take a closer look at the ways in which societies organize everyday life. Status. In every society, people build their everyday lives using the idea of status, a social position that a person holds. In everyday use, the word status usually means prestige, as when we say a college president has more status than a newly hired assistant professor. But sociologically speaking, both president and professor are statuses, or positions, within the collegiate organization. Status is part of our social identity and help define our relationship to others. One of the founders of sociology, George Simmel, once pointed out, before we can deal with anyone, we need to know who the person is. Status set. Each of us holds many statuses at once. The term status set refers to all the statuses a person holds at a given time. A teenage girl may be a daughter to her parents, a sister to her brother, a student at her school, and a goalie on her soccer team. Status sets change over the life course. A child grows up to become a parent, a student graduates to become a lawyer, and a single person marries to become a husband or wife, sometimes becoming single again as a result of a death or divorce. Joining an organization or finding a job enlarges our status set. Withdrawing from activities makes it smaller. Over a lifetime, people gain and lose dozens of statuses. Ascribed and achieved statuses. Sociologists classify statuses in terms of how people attain them. Ascribed status is a social status a person receives at birth or takes on involuntarily in life. Examples of ascribed life include being a daughter, a Cuban, a teenager, or widower. Ascribed statuses are matters about which we have little or no choice. By contrast, achieved status refers to a social position a person takes on voluntarily that reflects personal ability and effort. Achieved statuses in the United States include college student, Olympic athlete, nurse, software writer, police officer, and thief. In the real world, of course, most statuses involve a combination of ascription and achievement. That is, people's ascribed statuses influence the statuses they achieve. People who achieve the status of lawyer, for example, are likely to share the ascribed benefit of being born into a relatively well-off families. By the same token, many less desirable statuses, such as criminal, drug addict, or unemployed worker, are more easily achieved by people born into poverty. Master status. Some statuses matter more than others. A master status is a status that has special importance for social identity, often shaping a person's entire life. For most people, a job is a master status because it reveals a great deal about a person's social background, education, and income. In a few cases, name is a master status. Being in the Bush or Kennedy family attracts attention and creates opportunity. A master status can be negative as well as positive. Take, for example, serious illness. Sometimes people, even longtime friends, avoid cancer patients or patients with AIDS because of their illness. As another example, the fact that all societies limit opportunities of women makes gender a master status. Sometimes a physical disability serves as a master status to the point that where we dehumanize people by seeing them only in the terms of their disability. The Thinking About Diversity box shows how. Thinking about diversity, physical disability as a master status. Physical disability works in much the same ways as class, gender, or race in defining people in the eyes of others. In the following interviews, two women explain how a physical disability can become a master status, a trait that overshadows everything else about them. The first voice is that of 29-year-old Donna Finch, who lives with her husband and son in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and holds a master's degree in social work. She is also blind. Most people don't expect handicapped people to grow up. There are always supposed to be children. You aren't supposed to date, you aren't supposed to have a job, somehow you're just supposed to disappear. I'm not saying this is true of anyone else, but in my own case, I think I was more intellectually mature than most children and more emotionally immature. I'd say not until the last 4 or 5 years have I really felt whole. Rose Hellman is an elderly woman who has retired from her job and lives near New York City. She suffers from spinal meningitis and is also blind. You ask me if people are really different today than in the 20s and 30s. Not too much. They're still fearful of the handicapped. I don't know if fearful is the right word, but uncomfortable at least. But I can understand it somewhat. It happened to me. I once asked a man to tell me which staircase to use to get from the subway out to the street. He started giving me directions that were confusing, and I said, "Do you mind taking me?" He said, "Not at all." He grabbed me on the side with my dog on it, and so I asked him to take my other arm. He said, "I'm sorry, I have no other arm." And I said, "That's all right, I'll hold on to the jacket." It felt funny hanging on to the sleeve without the arm in it. Have you ever had a disease or disability that became a master status? If so, how did others react? How might a master status affect someone's personality? Can being very fat or very thin serve as a master status? Why or why not? Going back to page 138, role. Second important social structure is role. Behavior expected of someone who holds a particular status. A person who holds a status and performs a status. A person holds a status and performs a role. That's Linton, 1937. We don't know anything more than his name in parentheses. For example, holding the status of students leads you to perform the role of attending class and completing assignments. Both statuses and roles vary by culture. In the U.S., the status of uncle refers to the brother of a mother or father. In Vietnam, the word uncle is different on the mother's and father's side of the family, and the two men have different responsibilities. In every society, actual role performance varies within an individual's unique personality, and some societies permit more individual expression of a role than other. Role set. Because we hold many statuses at once, a status set, everyday life is a mix of many roles. Robert Merton, 1968, introduced the term role set to identify a number of roles attached to a single status. Figure 6.1 on page 140 shows 4 statuses of one person, each status linked to a different role set. First, as a professor, this woman interacts with students and with other academics. Second, in her work as a researcher, she analyzes data that she uses in her publication as an author. Third, the woman occupies the status of wife with a marital role toward her husband, with whom she shares household duties. Fourth, she holds the status of mother with routine responsibilities for the children, as well as toward their school and other organizations in her community. A global perspective that the roles people use to define their lives differ from society to society. In low-income countries, people spend fewer years as students, and family roles are often very important to social identity. In high-income nations, people spend more years as students, and family roles are typically less important to social identity. Another dimension of difference involves housework. In Global Map 6.1 on the next page, especially in poorer countries, housework falls heavily on women. Role conflict and role strain, page 140. People in modern high-income nations juggle many responsibilities demanded by their various statuses and roles. As mothers, And more fathers can testify the combination of parenting and working outside the home is physically and emotionally draining. Sociologists thus recognize role conflict as conflict among the roles of two or more statuses, connected to two or more statuses. We experience role conflict when we find ourselves pulled in various directions as we try to respond to the many statuses we hold. One response to role conflict is that deciding something has to go. More than one politician, for example, has decided not to run for office because of the conflicting demands of a hectic campaign schedule and family life. In other cases, people put off having children in order to stay on the fast track for career success. Even roles linked to a single status may make competing demands on us. Role strain refers to the tension among the roles connected to a singular status. A college professor may enjoy being friendly with students. At the same time, however, the professor must maintain the personal distance needed to evaluate students fairly. In short, performing the various roles attached to even one status can be something of a balancing act. One strategy for minimizing role conflict is separating parts of our lives so that we perform roles for one status at one time and place and carry out roles connected to another in a completely different setting. A familiar example of this setting is deciding to leave the job at work before heading home to the family. Role exit. After she left the life of a Catholic nun to become a universal sociologist, Helen Rose Fuchs E. Ball, I don't know how to say that name, began to study her own experience of role exit, the process by which people disengage from important social roles. Studying a range of exes, including ex-nuns, ex-doctors, ex-husbands, ex-alcoholics, E. Ball identified elements common to the process of becoming an ex. According to Ebal, the process begins as people come to doubt their ability to continue in a certain role. As they imagine alternative roles, they ultimately reach a tipping point when they decide to pursue a new life. Even as they are moving on, however, a past role can continue to influence their lives. Exes can carry with them a self-image shaped by an earlier role, which can interfere with the building of a new sense of self. For example, an ex-nun may hesitate to wear stylish clothing and makeup. Exes must also rebuild relationships with people who knew them in their earlier life. Learning new social skills is another challenge. For example, Ebal reports, ex-nuns who enter the dating scene after decades in the church are often surprised to learn that sexual norms are very different from those they knew when they were teenagers. The social contraction of reality. In 1917, the Italian playwright Luigi Pirandello wrote a play called The Pleasure of Honesty about a character named Angelo Baldovino, a brilliant man with a checkered past. Baldovino enters the fashionable home of the Rennie family and introduces himself in a peculiar way. Inevitably, we construct ourselves. Let me explain. I enter this house and immediately I become what I have to become. What I have to become. I construct myself. That is, I present myself to you in a form suitable to the relationship I wish to achieve with you, and of course, you do the same with me. Baldovino suggests that although behavior is guided by status and role, we have the ability to shape who we are and to guide what happens from moment to moment. In other words, reality is not as fixed as we may think. The social construction of reality is a process by which people creatively shape reality through social interactions. This idea is the foundation of symbolic interaction approach. As Baldovino's remark suggests, quite a bit of reality remains unclear in everyone's mind, especially in unfamiliar situations. So we present ourselves in terms that suit the setting and our purpose. We try to guide what happens next, and as others do the same, reality takes shape. Social interaction, then, is a complex negotiation that builds reality. Most everyday situations involve at least some agreement about what's going on, and how people see events depends on their different backgrounds, interests, and intentions. Street smarts. What people call street smarts is actually a form of constructing reality. In his autobiography, Down These Mean Streets, Peary Thomas recalls moving to an apartment in Spanish Harlem. Returning home one evening, young Peary found himself cut off by Juaneco, the leader of the local street gang, who was flanked by a dozen others. "What do you say, Mr. Johnny Gringo?" drawled Juaneco. "Think, man," I told myself. "Think your way out of a stomping. Make it good." "I hear you 104th Street coolies are supposed to have heart," I said. "I don't know this for sure. You know, there's a lot of streets where a whole clique is made out of punks who can't fight one guy unless they all jump him for the stomp." Hope this would push Juaneco into giving me a fair one. His expression didn't change. "Maybe we don't look at it that way." "Crazy man," I cheered. "Crazy man," I cheered inwardly. "The carbon is falling into my setup." "I wasn't talking to you," I said. "Where I come from, the prez is president 'cause he's got heart when it comes to dealing." Juaneco was starting to look uneasy. He had a bit on my worm and felt like a suckerfish. His boys were now light on me. They were no longer so much interested in stomping me as seeing the outcome between Juaneco and me. "Yeah," was his reply. I knew I'd won. Sure, I'd have to fight, but one guy, not 10 or 15. If I lost, I might still get stomped, but if I won, I might get stomped. I took care of this with my next sentence. "I don't know you or your boys," I said, "but they look cool to me. They don't feature as punks." I left them out purposely when I said they. Now his boys were in a separate class. I had cut him off. He would have to fight me on his own to prove his heart to himself, to his boys, and most important, to his turf. He got away from the stomp and asked, "Fair one, gringo?" This situation reveals the drama that apparently the author really loves this story. Sometimes subtle, sometimes savage, by which human beings creatively build reality. But, of course, not everyone enters a situation with equal standing. If a police officer had happened to drive by when Peary and Juaneco were fighting, both young men might have ended up in jail. The Thomas Theorem. By displaying his wits and fighting with Juaneco until they both tired, Peary won acceptance by the gang. What took place that evening in Spanish Harlem is an example of the Thomas Theorem, named after W. I. Thomas and Dorothy Thompson. Situations that are defined as real are real in their consequences. Applied to the social interaction, the Thomas Theorem means that although reality is initially soft as it's being shaped, it can become hard in its effects. In the case just described, local gang members saw Peary Thomas act in a worthy ways, so in their eyes he became worthy. Ethnomethodology, page 142. Most of the time we take social reality for granted. To become more aware of this world we help create, Harold Garfinkel, 1965, devised ethnomethodology, the study of the way people make sense of their everyday surroundings. This approach begins by pointing out that everyday behavior rests on a number of assumptions. When you ask someone the simple question, "How are you?" you usually want to know how the person is doing in general, but you might really be wondering how the person is dealing with a specific physical, mental, spiritual, financial challenge. However, the person being asked probably assumes that you are not really interested in the detail of any of these things and you are being polite. One good way to uncover the assumptions we make about reality is break the rules. For example, next time someone greets you by saying, "How are you?" offer details from your last physical examination and explain all the good and bad things that have happened to you since you woke up that morning. See how the person reacts. The results are predictable because we all have some of the ideas of rules of any everyday interaction. The person will most likely become confused and irritated by your unexpected behavior, a reaction that helps us see not only what the rules are, but also how important they are to everyday life, or everyday reality. Reality building, class and culture. People do not build everyday experience out of thin air. In part, how we act and what we see in our surroundings depends on our interests. Gazing at the sky on a starry night, for example, lovers discover romance and scientists see hydrogen atom fusing into helium. Social background also affects what we see, which is why residents of Spanish Harlem experience a different world than people living on Manhattan's pricey Upper East Side. In global perspective, reality construction varies even more. Consider these everyday situations. People waiting for their luggage in a Swedish airport stand behind a yellow line about 10 feet from the conveyor belt that carries the bags, then step forward only when they see their bags passing by. In the United States, people in the luggage claim area typically push right up to the conveyor belt, leaning forward, looking for their own bags to appear. In Saudi Arabia, the law forbids women to drive cars, a ban unthinkable in the United States. In this country, people assume that a short walk means a few blocks or a few minutes. In the Andes Mountains of Peru, this same phrase means traveling a few miles. The point is that people build a reality from surrounding culture. Culture explains how people the world over find different meanings in specific gestures, so inexperienced travelers can find themselves building an unexpected and unwelcome reality. Similarly, in a study of popular culture, Joellen Shevely screened Western films to men of East European descent and to Native American men. The men in both categories claimed to enjoy the films, but for very different reasons. White men interpreted the films as praising rugged people striking out for the West and conquering the forces of nature. Native American men saw in the same films a celebration of land and nature. Given their different cultures, it is as if people in two categories saw two different films. Films also have an effect on reality we all experience. In 2012, the New York Disabilities Film Festival screened films dealing with autism, blindness, cerebral palsy, and mental illness. These films, which were also screened in 10 other urban areas, raised awareness of the lives of people and their families as they cope with these serious personal challenges. That seems like a paragraph that is thrown in there. An increasing importance of social media. The social construction of reality has always involved face-to-face social interaction. In recent years, however, this process has also been aided by computer technology, and the concept of social media refers to technology that links people in social activity. Although newspapers and other print media are older examples of social media, more recent computer technology is much more powerful because it connects far larger number of people. In addition, computer-based technology is interactive, allowing individuals not only to receive messages, but also to send information to others. In the past, when people came together to form communities based on common interests, they gathered in a single location. Even a generation ago, few people imagined the dramatic changes that computer technology would bring to the landscape of social interaction. Today, of course, most people in the United States and nations around the world participate in various online communities with countless others who share some interest. Participants may be anywhere in physical space, and they are people whom we may or may not ever meet in person. The expansion of social media can be seen in an explosive increase in the public's use of social networking sites. Facebook, which began formal operation in 2014, has some 1.4 billion members worldwide. Similarly, Twitter was launched in 2006 as a social networking site, a microblogging system that allows users to send and receive short messages called tweets. It now boasts about 288 million registered users, most of them being Trump bots. Porn. Some sociologists have argued that the rise of social media has connected people in new ways but weakened social ties among people who share physical space. Take the case of two college roommates, each of whom might be interacting with thousands of other people while sitting just a few feet apart in the same dorm room, barely paying attention to each other. Among U.S. adults, 90% say they feel ignored by household members who are using electronic devices. Much of the same argument was made about the spread of the telephone technology more than a century ago. Like every major change in society, the rise of social media will spark controversy and debate, but there is little doubt that this trend is reshaping all aspects of everyday life, from the way people engage in social movements to the way they look for romance. Dramaturgical analysis, the presentation of self, page 144. Irving Goffman, 1922 to 1982, was another sociologist who analyzed social interaction, explaining that people live their lives much like actors performing on a stage. If we examine ourselves as directors observing what goes on in the theater of everyday life, we are doing what Goffman called dramaturgical analysis, the study of social interaction in terms of theatrical performance. Dramaturgical analysis offers a fresh look at the concepts of status and role. A status is a part in the play, and a role serves as a script, supplying dialogue and action for the characters. Goffman described each individual's performance as the presentation of self, a person's efforts to create specific impressions in the minds of others. This process is sometimes called impression management, begins with the idea of personal performances. As we present ourselves in everyday situations, we reveal information to others consciously and unconsciously. Our performance includes how we dress, the objects we carry, and our tone of voice and gestures. In addition, we vary our performance according to where we are. We may joke loudly in a restaurant, but lower our voice when entering a church, temple, or mosque. People design settings, such as homes or offices, to bring about desired reaction in others. An application, the doctor's office. Consider how physicians set up their offices to convey particular information to an audience of patients. The fact that medical doctors enjoy high prestige and power in the U.S. is clear upon entering a doctor's office. First, the doctor is nowhere to be seen. Instead, in what Goffman describes as the front region of the setting, the patient encounters a receptionist or gatekeeper who decides whether and when the patient can meet the doctor. A simple glance around the doctor's waiting room with patients, often impatiently waiting to be invited into the intersection, leaves little doubt that the doctor and the staff are in charge. The back region is composed of examination room plus the doctor's private office. Once inside the office, the patient can see a wide range of props, such as medical books and framed degrees, that gives the impression that the doctor has specialized knowledge necessary to call the shots. The doctor is usually seated behind the desk. The larger the desk, the greater the statement of power, and the patient is given only a chair. The doctor's appearance and manner offer still more information. The white lab coat or the costume may have practical function of keeping clothes from becoming dirty, but its social function is to let others know at a glance the physician's status. A stethoscope around the neck and a medical chart in hand, more props, have the same purpose. A doctor uses highly technical language that is often mystifying to the patient, again emphasizing the doctor is in charge. Finally, patients use the title doctor, but they in turn often are addressed by their first names, which further shows the doctor's dominant position. The overall message of a doctor's performance is clear. I will help you, but you must allow me to take charge. Nonverbal Communication, page 145. The novelist William Sansom describes a fictional Mr. Preety, English vacationer on a beach in Spain. He took care to avoid catching anyone's eye. First, he had to make it clear to those potential companions of his holiday that they were no concern to him whatsoever. He stared through them, round them, over them, eyes lost in space. The beach might have been empty. If by chance a ball was thrown his way, he looked surprised, then let a smile of amusement light his face. Kindly Preedy looked around, dazed to see if there were people on the beach, tossed it back with a smile to himself, not a smile at the people. He gathered together his beach wrap in a bag into a neat, sand-resistant pile. Methodical and sensible Preedy rose slowly to stretch his huge frame, big cat Preedy, and toss aside his sandals. Carefree Preedy, after all. I don't know. Without saying a word, Mr. Preedy offers a great deal of information about himself to anyone watching him. This process is nonverbal communication. Communication using body movements, gestures, and facial expression rather than speech. People use many parts of the body to convey information through body language. Facial expressions are the most important type of body language. Smiling, for instance, shows pleasure, although we distinguish among the deliberate smile of kindly Preedy on the beach, a spontaneous smile of joy at seeing a friend, a pained smile of embarrassment after spilling a cup of coffee, and then the full unrestrained smile of self-satisfaction that we often associate with winning some important contest. Eye contact is another key element of nonverbal communication. Generally, we use eye contact to invite social interaction. Someone across the room catches our eye, sparking a conversation. Avoiding another's eyes, by contrast, discourages communication. Hands, to speak for us. Common hand gestures in our society convey, among other things, an insult, a request for a ride, an invitation for someone to join us, or a demand that others stop in their tracks. Gestures also supplement spoken word. For example, pointing at someone in a threatening way gives greater emphasis to a word of warning, just as shrugging the shoulders adds an air of indifference to the phrase "I don't know," and rapidly waving the arms adds urgency to the single word "hurry." In everyday interaction, body language is an important way in which we transmit information to an audience as well as read information in the behavior of others. To people who have limited skills in spoken language used by those around them, body language takes on special importance. Similarly, to people who have a physical impairment, perhaps older people who have lost their ability to hear, reading body language can enhance understanding. Body language and deception. As any actor knows, it's difficult to pull off a perfect performance in front of others. In everyday interaction, unintended body language can contradict our planned meaning. A teenage boy offers an explanation for getting home late, for example, but his mother begins to doubt his words because he avoids looking in her eye. The celebrity on a television show claims that her recent musical flop is no big deal, but the nervous swings of her legs suggest otherwise. Because nonverbal communication is hard to control, it offers clues to deception in much the same way that changes in breathing, pulse rate, perspiration, and blood pressure recorded on a lie detector indicate a person is lying. Detecting dishonest performances is difficult because no single bodily gesture tells us for sure that someone is lying. But nervous movement of the hands or feet can be a sign of deception. Similarly, moving the head back or stepping away from someone, ways of adding distance between people, may be signs of deception. More generally, because of any performance involves so much body language, few people can engage in deception, especially when they feel a strong emotion, without some slip-up or leaking information that raises the suspicion of a careful observer. The key to detecting lies is to view the whole performance with an eye for inconsistencies. Page 146, Gender and Performances. Because women are socialized to respond to others, they tend to be more sensitive than men to nonverbal communication. Research suggests that women read men better than men read women. Gender is also one of the key elements in the presentation of self, as the following section explains. Demeanor. Demeanor, the way we act and carry ourselves, is the clue to social power. Simply put, powerful people enjoy more freedom in how they act. At the office, off-color remarks, swearing, or putting your feet on the desk may be acceptable for the boss, but rarely, if ever, for employees. Similarly, powerful people can interrupt others. Less powerful people are expected to show respect through silence. Because women generally occupy a position of lesser power, demeanor is a gender issue as well. As Chapter 13, Gender Stratification, explains, 38% of all working women in the United States hold clerical or service jobs under the control of supervisors, typically men. Women then learn to craft their personal performances more carefully than men and to defer to men more often in everyday interaction. Use of space. How much space does a personal performance require? Power plays a key role here, and the more power you have, the more space you use. Men typically command more space than women, whether pacing back and forth before an audience or casually sitting on a bench. Why? Our culture has traditionally measured femininity by how little space women occupy, the standard of daintiness, and masculinity by how much territory a man controls, the standard of turf. In 2014, New York City subway officials launched a campaign to discourage manspreading, the male practice of spreading the knees to take up more than one seat on the train. For both sexes, the concept of personal space refers to the surrounding area in which a person makes claims to some privacy. In the United States, people typically position themselves several feet apart when speaking. Throughout the Middle East, by contrast, people stand much closer. Just about everywhere, men often intrude into women's personal space. If a woman moves into a man's personal space, however, he is likely to take it as a sign of sexual interest. Staring, smiling, and touching. Eye contact encourages interaction. In conversations, women hold eye contact more than men, but men hold their brand of eye contact. Men have their own brand of eye contact. Staring. When men stare at women, they are claiming social dominance and defining women as sexual objects. Yeah. Although it often shows pleasure, smiling can be a sign of trying to please someone or submission. In a male-dominated world, it is not surprising that women smile more than men. Finally, mutual touching suggests intimacy and caring. Apart from close relationships, touching is generally something men do to women, but less often in our culture to other men. A male physician touches the shoulder of his female nurse as they examine a report. A young man touches the back of his woman friend as he guides her across the street, or a male tennis instructor touches a young women as he teaches them to hit a serve. In such examples, the intent of touching may be harmless and may bring little response, but it amounts to a subtle ritual by which men claim dominance over women. How is that so? Idealization. People behave the way they do for many, often complex reasons. Even so, Goffman suggests, we construct performances to idealize our intentions. That is, we convince others that what we do reflects ideal cultural standards rather than selfish motives. Idealization is easily illustrated by returning to the world of doctors and patients. In a hospital, doctors engage in a performance commonly described as making rounds. Entering the room of a patient, the doctor often stops at the foot of the bed and silently reads the chart. Afterwards, doctor and patient talk briefly. In ideal terms, this routine involves a doctor making a personal visit to check on a patient's condition. In reality, the picture is not so perfect. A doctor may see several dozen patients a day and remember little about many of them. Reading the chart is a chance to recall the patient's name and medical problems, but revealing The impersonality of medical care would undermine the cultural idea of the doctor as deeply concerned about the welfare of others. We recognize that most people do their jobs in order to make money. Doctors, professors, and other professionals, however, speak of their work as careers and typically idealize the motives for entering a chosen field. They describe their work as making a contribution to science, helping others, serving the community, and even answering a calling from God. Rarely do they admit the more common, less honorable motives, the income, power, prestige, and leisure time that these occupations provide. We all use idealization to some degree. When was the last time you smiled and spoke politely to someone you do not like? Have you acted interested in a class that was really boring? Such little lies in our performances help us get through the day, everyday life. Even when we suspect that others are putting on an act, we are unlikely to challenge their performances for the reasons that we shall examine next. Embarrassment and tact. The famous speaker giving a campus lecture keeps mispronouncing the college's name. The head coach rises to speak at the team's end of season banquet, unaware of the napkin still tucked in her dress. The student enters the lecture hall late and soaking wet, attracting the gaze of hundreds of classmates. As careful as individuals may try to craft their performances, slip-ups of all kinds occur. The result is embarrassment, which is discomfort following a spoiled performance. Goffman describes embarrassment as losing face. Embarrassment is an ever-present danger because idealized performances usually contain some deception. In addition, most performances involve juggling so many elements that one thoughtless moment can shatter the intended impression. A curious fact is that an audience often overlooks flaws in a performance, allowing the actor to avoid embarrassment. If we do point out a misstep, we do it quietly and only to help someone avoid even greater loss of face. In Hans Christian Andersen's classic fable, The Emperor's New Clothes, the child who blurts out the truth that the emperor is parading about naked is scolded for being rude. Often, members of an audience actually help the performer recover from a flawed performance. Tact is helping someone save face. After hearing a supposed expert make an embarrassingly inaccurate remark, for example, tactful people may ignore the comment as if it had never been spoken, or react with mild laughter, treating what was said as a joke, or they may simply respond, "I'm sure you didn't mean that," an indication that someone heard the statement but will not allow it to destroy the actor's performance. With such efforts in mind, we can understand Abraham Lincoln's comment that tact is the ability to describe others the way they see themselves. Why is tact so common? Because embarrassment creates discomfort, not just for the actor, but for everyone else as well. Just as a theater audience feels uneasy when an actor forgets his line, people who observe awkward behavior are reminded of how fragile their own performances are. Socially constructed reality thus functions like a dam holding back a sea of chaos. When one's performance springs a leak, others tactfully help to make repairs. Everyone lends a hand in building reality, and no one wants it suddenly swept away. In some, Goffman's research shows that although behavior is spontaneous in some respects, it is more patterned than we like to think. For centuries ago, William Shakespeare captured this idea in lines that still ring true. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players, and they have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Page 148, Interaction in Everyday Life, 3 applications. The final sections of this chapter illustrate the major elements of social interaction by focusing on 3 dimensions of everyday life: emotions, language, and humor. They got a lot of photos in this chapter, which is great because less words. Emotions, the social construction of feeling. Emotions, more commonly called feelings, are an important element of human social life. In truth, what we do often matters less than how we feel it. Emotions seem very personal because they are inside. Even so, just as society guides our behavior, it guides our emotional life. The biological side of emotions. Studying people all over the world, Paul Ekman reports that people everywhere express 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise. In addition, Ekman found that people in everyday society use much the same facial expressions to show these emotions. Ekman believed that some emotional responses are wired into human beings, that is, they are biologically programmed in our facial features, muscles, and central nervous system. Why might this be so? Over centuries of evolution, emotions developed in human species because they serve a social purpose, supporting a group life. Emotions are powerful forces that allow us to overcome our self-centeredness and build connections with others. Thus, the capacity for emotion arose in our ancestors along with the capacity for culture. The culture side of emotions. But culture does play an important role in guiding human emotions. First, Ekman explains culture defines what triggers an emotion. Whether people define the departure of an old friend as joyous, causing insulting, a loss, or mystical has a lot to do with culture. Second, lots of parentheses up in there. Second, culture provides rules for the display of emotions. For example, most people in the U.S. express emotions more freely with family members than with colleagues in the workplace. Similarly, we expect children to express emotions freely to parents, but parents tend to hide their emotions from their children. Third, culture guides how we value emotions. Some societies encourage the expression of emotions. Others expect members to control their feelings and maintain a stiff upper lip. Gender also plays a part. Traditionally, at least, many cultures expect women to show emotions, but they discourage emotional expression by men as a sign of weakness. In some cultures, of course, this pattern is less pronounced or even reversed. Emotions on the job, page 149. In the United States, most people are freer to express their feelings at home than on the job. The reason, as sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild, explains, is that typical company tries to regulate not only the behavior of its employees but their emotions. Take the case of the busy airline flight attendants who offers each passenger a drink, a bag of pretzels, and a smile. Do you think that this smile may convey real pleasure at serving the customer? It may, but Arley's studies points to a different conclusion. The smile is an emotional script demanded by the airline management as the right way to perform a job. Therefore, from Arley's research, we see an added dimension of presentation of self, described by Irving Goffman. Not only do our everyday life presentations to others involve surface acting, but they also invite deep acting of emotions. With these patterns in mind, it is easy to see that we socially construct our emotions as a part of our everyday reality, a process sociologists call emotion management. The controversy and debate box links the emotions displayed by women who decide to have an abortion to their political views and to their personal view of terminating a pregnancy. Let's go to page 150 for that. Managing feelings, women's abortion experiences. Liz, I just can't be pregnant. I'm going to go see my doctor about an abortion tomorrow. There's no way I can deal with a baby at this point in my life. Jen, I can't believe you do that, Liz. How are you going to feel a few years from now when you think about the child, what it would be doing if you'd let it live? Few issues generate as much emotion as abortion. In a study of women's abortions experiences, the sociologist Jennifer Keyes discovered emotional scripts or feeling rules that guided how women feel about ending a pregnancy. Keyes explains that emotional scripts arise from a political controversy surrounding abortion. The anti-abortion movement defines abortion as a personal tragedy, the killing of an unborn child. Given this definition, women who terminate a pregnancy through abortion are doing something morally wrong and can expect to feel guilt, grief, and regret. So intense are these feelings, according to the supporters of this position, that women often suffer from post-abortion syndrome. Those who take the pro-choice position have an opposing view of abortion. From this point of view, the woman's problem is the unwanted pregnancy. Abortion is an acceptable medical solution. Therefore, the emotion common to women who terminate a pregnancy should not be guilt but relief. In her research, Keyes conducted in-depth interviews with 40 women who recently had abortions and found all of them had used such scripts to frame their situation in an anti-abortion or pro-choice manner. In part, this construction of reality reflected the women's own attitudes about abortion. In addition, however, the women's partners and friends typically encourage specific feelings about the event. Ivy, one young woman in the study, had a close friend who was also pregnant. "Congratulations," she exclaimed when she learned of Ivy's condition. "We're going to have babies together." Such a statement established one feeling rule: having a baby is good, which sent the message to Ivy that her planned abortion should trigger guilt. Working in the other direction, Joe's partner was horrified by the news that she was pregnant. Doubting his own ability to be a father, he blurted out, "I would rather put a gun to my head than this baby." His panic not only defined having the child as a mistake, but alarmed Joe as well. Clearly, her partner's reaction made the decision to end the pregnancy a matter of relief from a terrible problem. Medical professionals also play a part in this process of reality construction by using specific terms. Nurses and doctors who talk about the baby encourage the anti-abortion framing of abortion and provoke guilt and grief. On the other hand, those who use language such as pregnancy, tissue, fetus, and the contents of the uterus encourage the pro-choice framing of abortion as fairly routine medical procedures leading to relief. Olivia began using the phrase products of conception when she picked up from her doctor, Denise spoke of her procedure as taking the extra cells out of my body. "Yeah, I did feel some guilt when I thought this was the beginning of life, but my body is full of life and you have a lot of cells in you." After undergoing the procedure, most women reported actively trying to manage their feeling, explained Ivy. "I never used the word baby. I kept saying to myself that it was not formed yet. There was nothing there yet. I kept that in mind." On the other hand, Keyes found that all of the women in her study who leaned toward anti-abortion position did use the term baby. Gina explained, "I do think of it as a baby. The truth is that I ended my baby's life. Thinking that makes me feel guilty, but considering what I did, maybe I should feel guilty." Believing that what she had done was wrong, in other words, Gina actively called out the feeling of guilt. In part, Keyes concluded to punish herself. In your own words, what are emotional scripts or feeling rules? Can you apply the idea of feeling rules to experience of getting married? In light of this discussion, how accurate is it to say our feelings are not quite as personal as we may think they are? Going back to page 149, language, the social construction of gender. Language is the thread that weaves members of a society into symbolic webs we call culture. Language communicates not only a surface reality, but also deeper levels of meaning. One such level involves gender. Language defines men and women differently in terms of both power and value. Language and power. A young man proudly rides his new motorcycle up his friend's driveway and boasts, "Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she a beauty?" On the surface, the question has little to do with gender, yet why does he use the pronoun she instead of he or it to refer to his prized possession? The answer is that men often use language to establish control over their surroundings. A man attaches a female pronoun to a motorcycle because it reflects power of ownership. Perhaps this is also why the United States and elsewhere, a woman who marries traditionally takes the name of her husband, because many of today's married women value their independence, at least some 10%, now keep their own name or combine the two family names. Language and value, page 151. Typically, the English language treats as masculine whatever has greater value, force, or significance. For instance, virtuous, meaning morally worthy or excellent, comes from the Latin word vir, meaning man. On the other hand, hysterical, meaning emotionally out of control, comes from the Greek word hysteria, meaning uterus. In familiar ways, language confers different values on the two sexes. Traditional masculine terms such as king and lord have a positive meaning, while comparable feminine words such as queen, madam, and dame have negative meanings. Similarly, the uses of the suffix et and s to denote femininity usually devalues the word to which they are added. For example, a major has a higher standing than majorette, as does a host in relation to hostess, or a master in relation to a mistress. Language both mirrors social attitudes and helps perpetuate them. Given the importance of gender in everyday life, perhaps we should not be surprised that women and men sometimes have trouble communicating with each other. In fact, some people comment with more than a little seriousness that the two sexes often seem to be speaking different languages. Reality play, the social construction of humor. Humor has played an important part in everyday life for all of human history. Everyone laughs at a joke, but few people think about what it makes something funny. We can apply many of the ideas developed in this chapter to explain how by using humor as we play with reality. The foundation of humor. Humor is produced by the social construction of reality. It arises as people create and contrast two different realities. Generally, one reality is conventional, that is, what culture leads people to expect in a specific situation. The other is unconventional, an unexpected violation of cultural patterns. Humor arises from contradictions, ambiguities, and double meanings found in different definitions of the same situation. There are countless ways to mix realities and generate humor. Reality play can be found in single statements that contradict themselves, such as nostalgia is not what it used to be. Statements that repeat themselves, such as Yogi Berra's "It's deja vu all over again," or statements that mix up words, such as Oscar Wilde's "Work is the curse of the drinking class." Even switching around syllables to do the trick, as in the case of the country song, "I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy." You can also build a joke the other way around, leading the audience to expect an unconventional answer, then delivering a very ordinary one. When a reporter asked a famous gangster, Willie Sutton, why he continued to rob banks, for example, he replied dryly, "Because that's where the money is." Regardless of how a joke is constructed, the greater opposition or difference that is created between the two definitions of reality, the greater the humor that results. In telling jokes, the comedian uses various strategies to strengthen this opposition and make the joke funnier. One common technique is to present the first or conventional remark in conversation with another actor, then turn toward the audience to deliver the second unexpected line. In the Marx Brothers movie Groucho, Marx remarks, "Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend." Then raising his voice and turning to the camera, he adds, "And inside of a dog, it's too dark to read." I don't get that one. Such changing channels emphasizes the difference between the two realities. Following the same logic, stand-up comedians may reset the audience to conventional expectations by interjecting, but seriously folks, between jokes. Monty Python comedian John Cleese did this with his trademark, and now for something completely different. Comedians pay careful attention to their performers, their precise words they use, and the timing of their delivery. A joke is well told if the comedian creates the sharpest possible opposition between the realities. In careless performance, the joke falls flat. Because the key to humor lies in the collision of realities, we can see why the climax of a joke is termed the punchline. The dynamics of humor, getting it. After hearing a joke, did you ever say, "I don't get it"? Yeah, just now. To get humor, members of the audience must understand both the conventional and unconventional realities well enough to appreciate the difference. A comedian may make getting a joke by leaving out some important information. In such cases, listeners must pay attention to the stated element of the joke, then fill in the missing pieces. A simple example is the comment of the movie producer Hal Roach on his 100th birthday: "If I had known I would live to 100, I would have taken better care of myself." Here, getting the joke depends on realizing that Roach must have taken pretty good care of himself because he made it to 100, or as my own father, who lived to the age of 95, used to say, "At my age, I don't even buy green bananas anymore." Sure, who knows how long he's going to live, we would think to ourselves to finish the joke. Here is an even more complex joke. What do you get if you cross an insomniac, an agnostic, and a dyslexic? An answer: a person who stays up all night wondering if there is a dog. To get this one, you need a good bit of information. You must know that insomnia is an inability to sleep, that an agnostic doubts the existence of God, and dyslexia causes a person to reverse the letters in words. Why would a comedian want the audience to make this sort of effort to understand a joke? Our enjoyment of a joke is increased by the pleasure of figuring out for ourselves all the pieces needed to get it. There's a very tiresome section here. In addition, getting the jokes makes you an insider compared to those who don't get it. We have all experienced the frustration of not getting a joke, fear of being judged stupid, along with a sense of being excluded from a pleasure shared by others. Sometimes someone may tactfully explain the joke so that the other person doesn't feel left out, but as the old saying goes, if a joke has to be explained, it isn't very funny. The topics of humor. All over the world, people smile and laugh, making humor a universal element of human culture. But because the world's people live in different cultures, humor rarely travels well. October 1, Kobe, Japan. Is it possible to share a joke with people who live halfway around the world? At dinner, I asked 2 Japanese college women to tell me a joke. "You know crayon?" Asako asked, awed. "How do you ask for a crayon in Japanese?" I responded, "I have no idea." She laughs outside as she says what sounds like crayon, crayon. Her companion laughs too. My wife and I sit awkwardly with a quizzical look on our faces. Asako relieves some of our embarrassment by explaining that the Japanese word for give me is kureyo, which sounds like crayon. I force a smile. What is humorous to the Japanese may be lost on the Chinese, South Africans, or people. Blah. Even the social diversity of our own country means that different types of people will find humor in different situations. New Englanders, Southerners, blah 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 have their own brands of humor, as do blah blah. Age differences, different people from blah blah blah. But for everyone, topics that lend to themselves double meanings or controversy generate humor. In the U.S., the first jokes many of us learned as children concerned bodily functions, kids are not supposed to talk about. They're the mere mention of unmentionable acts, or even parts of the body can dissolve young faces into laughter. Are there jokes that do break the culture barrier? Yes, but they must touch on universal human experiences, such as, say, turning on a friend. I think of a number of jokes, but none seems likely to work. Understanding jokes about the United States is difficult for people who know little of our culture. Is there something more universal? Inspiration. Two fellows are walking in the woods and come up on a huge bear. A guy leans over and tightens his laces on his running shoes. "Jake," says the other, "what are you doing? You can't outrun this bear." "I don't have to outrun the bear. All I have to do is outrun you." Smiles all around. Humor often walks a fine line between what is funny and what is sick or offensive. During the Middle Ages, people used the word humors, derived from the Latin humidus, meaning moist, to refer to the various bodily fluids believed to regulate a person's health. Researchers today document the power of humor to reduce stress and improve health. One recent study of cancer patients, for example, found that the greater people's sense of humor, the greater their odds of surviving the disease. Such findings confirm the old saying that laughter is the best medicine. At the extreme, however, people who always take conventional reality lightly risk being defined as deviant or even mentally ill. Parentheses, a common stereotype shows insane people laughing uncontrollably, and for a long time mental hospitals were known as funny farms. Then, too, every social group considers certain topics too sensitive for humorous treatment, and joking about them risks criticisms for having a sick sense of humor and being labeled sick yourself. All these freaking parentheses. People's religious beliefs, tragic accidents, or appalling crimes are some of the topics of sick jokes or no jokes at all. Even years later, there have been no jokes about the victims of September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. The function of humor. Humor is found everywhere because it works as a safety valve for potentially disruptive sentiments. Put another way, humor provides an acceptable way to discuss sensitive topics without appearing too serious or offending anyone. Having said something controversial, people can use humor to diffuse the situation by simply, "I didn't mean anything by what I said, it's just a joke." People also use humor to relieve tension in uncomfortable situations. One study of medical examinations found that most patients try to joke with doctors to ease their own nervousness. Humor and conflict. Humor may be a source of pleasure, but it can also be used to put down other people. Men who tell jokes about women, for example, typically expressing some measure of hostility toward them. Similarly, jokes about gay people relieve tensions about sexual orientation. Real conflict can be asked by humor in situations where one or both parties choose not to bring the conflict out into the open. Put down jokes make one category of people feel good at the expense of another. After collecting and analyzing jokes from many societies, Christy Davies confirmed that ethnic conflict is one driving force behind humor in most of the world. The typical ethnic joke makes fun of some disadvantaged category of people, at the same time making the joke teller feel superior. Given the Anglo-Saxon traditions of U.S. society, Poles and other ethnic and racial minorities have long been the butt of jokes in the U.S., as have Newfoundlanders in Eastern Canada, blah, 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 different kinds of examples. Disadvantaged people also make fun of the powerful, although usually with some concern about who might be listening. Women in the U.S. joke about men, just as African Americans find humor in white people's ways and poor people poke fun at the rich. Throughout the world, people target their leaders with humor, and officials in some countries take such jokes seriously enough to arrest those who do not show proper respect. In some, humor is much more important than we may think. It is a means of mental escape from the conventional world that is never entirely to our liking. This fact helps explain why so many of our nation's comedians are from the ranks of historically marginalized people, including Jews and African Americans. As long as we maintain a sense of humor, we assert our freedom and are not prisoners of reality. But by putting a smile on our faces, we can change ourselves and the world just a little, and for the better. And on page 152 is Aziz, that sexual guy. Because humor involves challenging established conventions, the most U.S. comedians, including Aziz Ansari, have been social outsiders, members of racial or ethnic minorities. So now we're to the Seeing Sociology in the Everyday Life section, page 154. I'm just going to go to the hint. How do we construct the reality we experience? Just about every element of presentation conveys information about us to others. So the information found on a website like Facebook is significant. Some information is intentional, for example, what people write about themselves and the photos they choose to post. Other information may be unintentional, but is nevertheless picked up by a careful viewer who may be noting such things as these: the length and tone of a person's profile. Is it long-winded list of talents and accomplishments, or humorous and modest? The language used. Poor grammar may be a clue to education level. The hour or day that the person wrote the material. A person creating his profile at 11 p.m. on Saturday night may not be quite the party person he describes himself to be. Blah, blah. Page 156 is the summary. So, social structure refers to the social patterns that guide our behavior in everyday life. The building blocks of social structure are status and role. Social interaction, the process by which people act and react in relation to others. Status is a social position that is a part of our social identity, and that defines our relationship to others. A status can be either ascribed or achieved. Ascribed status, which is involuntary, which, for example, being like a teenager, an orphan, or a Mexican American. An achieved status, which is earned, like being an honor student, a pilot, or a thief. A master status, which can be either ascribed or achieved, has special importance for a person's identity, for example, being blind, a doctor, or a Kennedy. Status, a social position that a person holds. Status set, all the statuses a person holds at a given time. Ascribed, social position a person receives at birth and takes on involuntarily. I just covered those. Role conflict results from tension among roles linked to two or more statuses. A woman who juggles her responsibilities as a mother and a corporate CEO. Role strain results from the tension among the roles linked to a single status, like the college professor who enjoys personal interaction with students, but at the same time knows the social distance is necessary to evaluate the students fairly. So role is behavior expected of someone who holds a particular status. Role set is a number of roles attached to a single status. Role conflict, conflict among the roles connected to two or more statuses. Role strain, tension among the roles connected to a single status. Through social interaction, we construct the reality we experience. For example, two people interacting both try to shape the reality of their situation. The Thomas theorem says the reality of people construct in their interaction has real consequences for the future. For example, a teacher who believes a certain student to be intellectually gifted may encourage exceptional academic performance. So the Thomas theorem says that the reality people construct in their interaction has real consequences. Ethnomethodology is a strategy to reveal the assumptions people have about their social world. We can expose these assumptions by intentionally breaking the rules of social interaction and observing the reactions of other people. Both culture and social class shape the reality of people construct. For example, a short walk for a New Yorker is a few city blocks, but for a peasant in Latin America, it could be a few miles. The expansion of social media has dramatically changed how people interact. The social construction of reality no longer requires face-to-face interaction. Social construction of reality, the process by which people creatively shape reality through social interaction. Thomas theorem. W.I. Thomas's claim that situations defined as real are real in their consequences. Ethnomethodology. Harold Garfinkel's term for the study of the way people make sense of their everyday surroundings. Social media, technology that links people in social activity. Goffman's analysis to several familiar situations. Dramaturgical analysis explores the social interaction in terms of theatrical performance. A status operates as a part in a play, and the role is the script. Performances are the way we present ourselves to others. Performances are both conscious and unconscious. Performances include costume, props, and the demeanor. Gender affects performances because men typically have greater social power than women. Gender differences involve demeanor, use of space, smiling, staring, and touching. Demeanor. With greater social power, men have more freedom in how they act. Use of space. Men typically command more space than women. Staring and touching are generally done by men to women. Smiling, as a way to please others, is more commonly done by women. Idealization of performers means we try to convince others our actions reflect ideal culture rather than selfish motives. Embarrassment is the loss of face. People use tact to help others save face. Dramaturgical analysis. Irving Goffman's term for the study of social interaction in terms of theatrical performance. Presentation of self. Irving Goffman's term for a person's effort to create specific impressions in the mind of others. Nonverbal communication. Communication using body movements, gestures, and facial expressions rather than speech. Personal space. The surrounding area which a person makes some claim to privacy. Interactions in everyday life. 3 applications. Emotion. The social construct of a feeling. The same basic motions are biologically programmed in all human beings, but culture guides what triggers emotions and how people display them and how people value emotions. In everyday life, presentation of self involves managing emotions as well as behavior. Language. The social construction of gender. Gender is an important element of everyday interaction. Language defines women and men as different types of people, reflecting the fact that society attaches greater power and value to what is viewed as masculine. Reality play. The social construction of humor. Humor results from the differences between conventional and unconventional definitions of a situation. Because humor is part of a culture, people around the world find different situations funny. That is the end of Chapter 6, page 157.